many feel there are two Americas. An America for the rich and powerful who live one life, and an America for everyone else. When I started with Brett Massey, I actually didn't think this would become something that the White House would be that opposed to. Trump ran on saying, let's get all these Epstein files out. We haven't offered a clear alternative vision. You hear the Democrats and it seems defeatist. Well, Iran is such a key part of the future coalition. I don't know why you wouldn't want to endorse him. So he's excited people. We want that energy. But we also want the energy of people who are in the center of the party and people on the who have a different vision.
In your conversations with tech CEOs, do you think they understand the responsibility that they have?
If you're a social media platform, you have an obligation to the safety of a minor and what content is happening. I worry about people not participating in politics, not showing up to town halls because of the fear of violence. If Donald Trump has made us smaller as Americans, we need to make a country bigger in spirit about who we really are. We want rich and powerful men who abused young girls or who covered up for Epstein to face consequences. And we've had Marjorie Taylor Greene join us, we've had Lauren Boebert join us, we've had Nancy Mace join us. This is going to pass on September 23rd, and it is the first time since Donald Trump walked down the escalator that we have broken the MAGA base.
Congressman Ro Khanna, welcome to the People's Cabinet.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we are coming at a very scary time in politics. Charlie Kirk was shot and killed at an event. It seems like we're more divided than ever. You have someone who obviously has been a champion of the Democratic Party and the policies therein, but you've obviously also made an effort to bridge the divide in bipartisan fashion. Help us think through the time we're in and how you think about it.
It's just a deeply sad time for the nation. We're hateful, angry, embarrassed, afraid. I invoked last night Bobby Kennedy with a colleague when Kennedy said, let us resolve to remove the violence and the stain of bloodshed that is spreading across our land and make an effort of understanding of love and compassion. That was his famous speech, of course, in Indiana after King's assassination. We need to do better in this country to treat fellow Americans with respect, to not just be tempted to respond insult with insult, mockery with mockery. You know, Emmanuel Cleaver says fire with fire leaves us all with ashes. And my belief is that the antidote to Trumpism is statesmanship. My belief is that the antidote to a campaign of fear is a campaign of hope and aspiration. That if Donald Trump has made us smaller as Americans, we need to make a country bigger in spirit about who we really are. And that is what we need to offer at this moment for our nation.
Do you worry about your safety?
I do, but there are a lot of people who in this country have a tougher time than I do. I mean, anyone who is a member of Congress who's out there, who does town halls, obviously it's less safe today than it was when I first got elected to Congress. And I first got elected during Trump's first election. And so we take precautions, and anyone needs to. But I worry about people like Charlie Kirk, people who are activists, people who are out in the public eye, people who are just expressing political opinions. And I worry about people not participating in politics, not showing up to town halls because of the fear of violence.
You represent a large chunk of Silicon Valley, and a part of this conversation about our division lies somewhat within how the algorithms are dividing us in many ways, right? I've just recently gotten into this work from government, and to see how many creators need to game the algorithm in order to get clicks, in order to get people to watch their things. There's a lot of arguments of that sows division, and not to say there aren't tremendous benefits to what tech companies are doing with regard to connecting people, but I'm curious in your conversations with CEOs and people who are innovating in Silicon Valley, how they're balancing how technology can help, especially with things like AI, and then how it can potentially, hurt and make things in terms of loneliness, other things even worse.
Well, they're not doing a good enough job, and the country has failed in having a regulatory framework. I introduced with Tim Berners-Lee who was the founder of the World Wide Web, an Internet Bill of Rights in 2017. Things like you own your own data. People shouldn't be able to take your data and target folks without your consent. And these basic principles still have not passed in Congress. Look, after the printing press, which we all celebrate as a great achievement, for 100 years there was war in Europe. Erasmus, who was the champion of the printing press, says this is horrific. The pamphlets after the printing press were much worse than anything on social media. They were talking about let's go to war. And it took 100 years before Europe figured that out and before the printing press became a positive. And what happened in those 100 years? We built the institutions of liberal democracy. And so the question is, yes, there's a technology. Yes, it allows for greater connectivity. But if it was simply that easy that just have people talk and that will create inspiring democracy, you would not need hundreds of years of political philosophy. What is our task is to create the digital spaces, like you're doing here, that can model an alternative to sensationalism and to create the regulatory framework that does not allow the monetization of sensationalism. How do we articulate a vision in principle and law for the digital sphere to help deliberative democracy? And that to me is one of the tests of our generation.
And how do you help our listeners understand? I think a lot of people at this point have used some version of ChatGPT, Gemini, what have you. But I'm not sure people truly, and I just think people need to understand more from people like you who live and breathe this. What are the risks if we don't do the regulation, right? If we leave it open and, a lot of people do it replacement for Google right now, right? That's the primary reason. But what could go down the road and what could we be stumbling into if we're not careful?
Sure. Well, let me give you some very basic things. If you have a young daughter and they are on any of these social media platforms, often they are getting targeted content that has led to more suicidal thoughts. This is not anecdotal, it's data showing this, that has led to more eating disorders, that has led to a less self-confidence. So we should have the Kids Online Safety Act that would create a standard of harm for the child. Almost every other major Western democracy has that, so that if you're a social media platform, you have an obligation to the safety of a minor and what content is happening. We should have transparency in in what algorithms you're using, so that we know if you're just monetizing anger and rage in your algorithm. We should require cleaning up the bots. Most of the hate is often not even human beings, it's bots. There was a study done in the Alternative for Deutschland, which is a extreme right-wing party, is dominance online. And many of those folks were using bots. So clear out the bots. Have much stricter age requirements for people on these platforms. Those are just some things. Then also, if we required you to have your data and and had to consent to it, these companies wouldn't get as much aggregated data to be able to do the kind of targeting that they do. And if we had some antitrust enforcement, you'd have more alternative sites, alternative communication sites, so that maybe there were alternatives to rage-based social media virality.
In your conversations with tech CEOs, do you think they understand the responsibility that they have with so many people using their platforms and the way their algorithms are written? And I think there's also like a wide range of conversation about whether this is, the algorithm just kind of takes over and it just, you set the protocols of if our user is spending enough time on this content, you continue to serve, versus intentionally serving, certain kinds of content that they know will cause division, right? There's all this debate about how sinister is the wrong word, but how focused they are on the content itself versus just like, oh, it's the algorithm, it wasn't our fault that we're serving this stuff. How do you think that through? And in your conversation with tech CEOs, do you think they get that responsibility?
They don't for ideological reasons. They conflate free speech with thoughtful speech. Their view is that people should have forums for expression of whatever they want. And I am a free speech enthusiast and and a huge proponent of free speech. I mean, I famously wrote an email to Twitter saying they shouldn't take down Hunter Biden's post that the New York Post posted in defense of the principles of free speech. And that email leaked, but people said, okay, he's defending free speech. But free speech doesn't mean just because all of us get to express our opinions doesn't mean that that's going to be a healthy democracy. Tocqueville in New England talked about the schools of liberty. He said that participating in town halls, participating in local government gave people the tools of citizenship to actually solve issues, to resolve difference. And what the tech CEOs don't understand is just providing a forum where everyone says whatever they want may be constitutionally protected, but isn't doing enough to think about our responsibility to positive conversation in a democracy, to civil conversation in a democracy, to our children. And so there's a role for the government in terms of articulating a framework without infringing on free speech. And there's a role for people like you who can think of alternative uses of the digital space that may be able to get traction as opposed to just negativity.
Part of the public conversation, both online and in person, is about trying to put people in labels and putting people in corners and division. You've been a very interesting person in Congress because I think people struggle to put a label on you, whether you're far to the left, center, what have you. How are you thinking about how labels exist in this town, and then also how you think about yourself in the spectrum of the party and in politics in general?
Well, I'm a proud progressive Democrat that has a vision for the economic renewal of the country. I believe that the Democratic mission is simple. We need to be tackling the economic divides, the economic inequality that is tearing this country apart, and to make our highest mission the economic independence and economic security of every family and every community across this country. And I have a progressive vision on how to do that. We need to be taxing the wealth in my district more to be able to have universal childcare, universal health care, universal access to education. But I also believe that we need economic growth and economic investment in communities to create good-paying jobs. So I've called for a White House Economic Development Council to help finance new factories, to finance new trade schools, finance new health centers, work with local communities for economic development, a Marshall Plan, not for Europe, but for America. And so people often describe me as a pro-growth progressive, a progressive who wants to tackle this economic divide, both in terms of job creation and in terms of expanding the safety net.
And what do you think about the tent of the Democratic Party? There's a lot of conversation about new faces to the party, like Zohran Mamdani. I understand that he was an assemblyman, but in terms of the national stage, and those who are hesitant to endorse him, how are you thinking about those faces?
Well, Zohran is such a key part of the future coalition. I don't know why you wouldn't want to endorse him. I just don't understand that. He's got lines on his on the scavenger hunt day. And you
it's
can't.
Incredible to watch.
I mean, I saw those lines like if you have like a good ice cream shop or like or not for a political candidate. So he's excited people. We want that energy, but we also want the energy of people who are in the center of the party and people on who have a different vision. We need to bring them together, not by compromising what we believe. I'm for Medicare for all. I'm for a wealth tax on billionaires, but by articulating a vision that can say, how do we all come together? My view is that task is tackling economic inequality and tackling the regional divides and offering an inspiring economic vision for the country. I call it economic patriotism. And I believe that can bring the party together, even though if people don't agree with every single position I take. But if you can't bring the party together, how are you going to bring the country together? I mean, if anyone wants to be a leader in the House or the Senate or for the party, and they say, well, I can't even bring this party together, do you think the country is going to think, well, you're going to bring the country together? And what this country is desperate for are people who are going to offer a hopeful, affirmative vision that makes us move forward, that puts the Trump chapter in the rearview mirror. They don't want us to mimic Trump. They don't want us to be junior Trumps and allow for the devolution of our politics. There have been in our history many, many presidents. FDR was hopeful and aspirational. John F. Kennedy was hopeful and aspirational. Ronald Reagan, who I disagree with, was hopeful and aspirational. Barack Obama was hopeful and aspirational. Bill Clinton was hopeful and aspirational. Joe Biden was aspirational. And then Donald Trump has won 2 campaigns on fear. And everyone in our party is, who's the villains? Who are we going to attack? How do we have fear? I was like, how about all the other presidents who won on inspiration and vision? How about reaching for a higher bar? How about trying to have an ounce of the inspiration that a Mamdani had or an Obama had, as opposed to just copying the Donald Trump template?
Do you think that...
By the way, Obama would have won every election against Trump in a landslide.
Do you think this lack of vision that you outlined is the reason why the Democratic Party's favorability is so low? Why do you think, even in the era of Trump, it still continues to be under that of Trump's approval rating?
We haven't offered a clear alternative vision. You hear the Democrats, and it seems defeatist. We're losing our democracy. Everything is going over to fascism. America is losing out. There are serious threats. I don't want to diminish the threats. The dismantling of federal agencies, the militarization of our streets, the disregard of Congress, the deportations without due process. But when you're on an airplane and there's turbulence, do you want your pilot saying we're crashing, we're crashing, we're crashing? Or do you want your pilot saying we're going to get to the other side? We need leaders who are going to say we've overcome the Civil War, we've overcome World War II, we've overcome slavery, Jim Crow. Here's how we get to the other side and our democracy is going to be strong. Here is our vision. And here's our vision that's going to defeat Trumpism by actually breaking the MAGA base, by bringing some of them over to our side. The antidote to Trumpism is statesmanship. The antidote to fear is bigness and inspiration. And I think we have not articulated an alternative vision. We have not offered a confident leadership about how we're going to take this country for the moment. And we haven't had enough inspiration. Mamdani touched a chord because he has inspiration. You may not agree with every platform, but we need more of an alternative, hopeful, inspirational, confident vision that meets the moment and is clear-eyed about the challenges.
What do you think are the pillars of that vision?
The first is a belief in America's resilience, confidence, ability to overcome challenge. You know, I grew up a son of immigrants, born in Philadelphia in our bicentenary in 1976. My grandfather spent years in jail with Gandhi, alongside Gandhi, not knowing whether India would ever be free. And my parents came here for a better life. And I grew up in a 99% white community. I had teachers who believed in me, Little League coaches who believed in me. And this country elected me to represent arguably the largest wealth generation place in the history of humanity. 5 companies over $1 trillion, $14 trillion of wealth. It's a great country. It's an incredible country. We have to appeal to that. And then we say, well, this country is ailing. Why? 70% of Americans don't believe in the American dream. You have all this wealth in Rose District, but what about the people who built the steel? What about the people who scaled the cliffs of Normandy? What about the people who were beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge? How are they participating in modern life? And then we have a vision, not by conquering land like Donald Trump, who may have been fine during James Polk's era, but a modern vision of how we're going to build economic security for every family in this country and economic independence for every family. And we execute on that vision. And that economic play and that economic plan starts to to help the divisions heal, starts to bring us together with a common national mission.
One of the things that we like to do on the podcast is just talk about substantive policy issues or proposals that are dear to people, so that people understand the substance, not just the rhetoric. And I know you've been very out front on childcare and the cost of childcare. I have 2 young kids, so I'm experienced this firsthand. And can you talk about the work you've done here and just how people should think about the way you're approaching childcare?
Well, the person who really paved the way on the childcare issue was Elizabeth Warren. She said childcare is infrastructure, and she was absolutely right. I was in Pennsylvania, and someone said to me, a steel worker, that the biggest issue they had, I was talking about bringing new steel plants, and they said, Ro, what about childcare? Our kids can't afford it. Childcare costs have gone from about 10% of a family's budget to 20%, over 10 grand a year. So I modeled a plan that Canada has actually implemented, childcare at $10 a day, $300 a month. Childcare workers pay $20 to $25. Childcare workers should be paid that. And why not? They're doing the most important thing. They're looking after our young kids. And it should be flexible. If you want to go to a child care center, that's fine. If you want friends and family to help or relatives to help, that's fine. If you're a stay-at-home parent, you get a stipend if you're under a certain amount of income. And it's simple to understand. Child care, $10 a day. Now, it costs about $80 billion. So there are several ways we can pay for it. We can either hope that, we can tax the trillionaires. Someone was saying, do you have a problem with Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire? I was like, well, if we tax it at 3%, we just need 3 trillionaires and we pay for all child care. Or more seriously, the wealth tax is part of it. We don't need over $1 trillion defense budget in this country that is going to defense contractors. We can have a 5% cut in that and fund universal child care in America. We can have a tax on stock buybacks. We can have a financial transaction tax. But I am for a universal child care plan, child care at $10 a day.
And when you hear from the other side who aren't supportive of what you're proposing, what is their rationale?
The cost. They don't want to pay for it. They think, I'm upfront. It's going to cost $70 to $80 billion a year. It's the cost issue.
But to your point, it's always interesting to me, especially some of the Republicans who come from the private sector who have made their living on long-term investments that have paid off for them, right? That they don't understand the long-term investment of allowing people to actually go to work and produce for the economy. You can't do that if you're having to take care of kids at home, right?
Well, absolutely. And the biggest investment is in the emotional, in the educational investment of these young people. And that's not just what we believe. It's James Heckman won the Nobel Prize in Chicago for showing that the biggest investment you can make is in the early education of kids. It has enormous impact on their educational achievement, on their career achievement, on their emotional stability with the challenges we face with mental health. Now, the Republicans often say just also delicense, deregulate. But that's not the challenge. You want child care folks who take care of young babies to have the skills and the professionalism to be able to do it. And you want flexibility, sure, but ultimately it costs money. It's expensive to look after young babies. And the question is, does a society want to pay for it?
I want to cover the work that you're doing across the aisle on the Epstein files. I feel like there's been so much on this in the last few months that people's heads are kind of spinning as to where we are on it. Could you just talk a little bit about your work, especially with Rep. Massey?
It's been about transparency. It's about restoring trust in government. When I started with Rep. Massey, I actually didn't think this would become something that the White House would be that opposed to. Trump ran on saying, let's get all these Epstein files out. J.D. Vance was on podcast after podcast. Let's release the files. And the reason is that many feel there are two Americas, an America for the rich and powerful who live one life, and an America for everyone else. And they didn't like the fact, and they were offended by the fact that someone could commit heinous acts against young girls and have rich and powerful people covering up for him and possibly participating in it. And then what he said is, well, you can't prosecute me because I know this politician. You can't prosecute me because I'm rich. The British ambassador just resigned, was fired, because he was trying to cover up for Jeffrey Epstein. That happened because of our investigation. We want full transparency, and he's on the left. So people say, is this political? No, it's not political. We want rich and powerful men who abused young girls or who covered up for Epstein to face consequences. That is foundational to trust in government. And we've had Marjorie Taylor Greene join us. We've had Lauren Boebert join us. We've had Nancy Mace join us. We're at 217 signatures on a discharge petition. In my 9 years in Congress, a discharge petition has never passed. This is going to pass on September 23rd. We're going to get to 218 when a new Democrat gets sworn in. And it is the first time since Donald Trump walked down the escalator that we have broken the MAGA base. I mean, a lot of people have tried to insult Donald Trump, mock Donald Trump, call him all sorts of names, but have we ever been able to get 10, 15, 20% of the MAGA base on our side? Don't we need to do that just in terms of math and building a coalition to offer a new politics? So this is an issue that is just. This is an issue about standing for survivors It's about protecting our children, and it's building a new coalition of politics in this country for a post-Donald Trump era.
And do you have a feeling from your work on what Donald Trump's role is with all of this, or do you think it's still to be determined, and where do you think it all ends?
I don't know. And what I don't understand is what force is holding him back from releasing this. Because if it's just things like that birthday book and letter, I mean, that's embarrassing and it's hideous, but those are things he's survived, and it's kind of baked into his persona since the Access Hollywood tapes. I don't think that really came as a surprise to anyone. So there's some powerful forces that are preventing him from releasing this. Maybe it's that there's so many people who are going to be implicated around the world, like this British ambassador. And there is a hesitancy to have that kind of accountability. But it's less about Trump, honestly, and much more about the American people restoring trust in government and believing that rich and powerful people in this country can't do things with impunity.
My last question to you. There's a lot of people who see the news and they just become so disaffected by it. People still hurting from November, people who just think that politics isn't for them anymore, or just have never engaged. The neighbors of the listeners of this podcast know those people and candidly trust those people a lot more than they will you or I. What is your piece of advice to listeners to take to those neighbors they know who just feel checked out and don't want to get involved in politics?
Our inheritance is too great to have that kind of cynicism. We haven't earned that cynicism. I mean, we're recording today on September 11th, and it's a reminder of people who died for this country. We've had people who died in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. We've had people who died scaling the cliffs of Normandy. We've had people who died fighting slavery. John Lewis, whose picture hangs right behind me, and the op-ed we did together about the interconnection of Gandhi and King's movement. I mean, he was beaten for freedom. My grandfather, for freedom, was in jail year after year for 4 years. We have an inheritance of sacrifice. And we have not earned, as a generation, the right to cynicism. We have to do our part. We have to do our part to build a cohesive multiracial democracy. And we need to be inspired. Now, does that mean that inspiration is going to be every single American? That's unrealistic. But if we can get hundreds of thousands of Americans inspired to participate, that is the type of movement that will change the direction of our politics.
Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you for coming on the People's Cabinet.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and put in the comments below who else you'd like to see sworn in. And stay tuned for new episodes every Tuesday. Let's go.